Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Mat Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And Magrey, deVega, the Senior Pastor.
So Magrey, you just preached the intro sermon for our series Hearts of Fire, and you were exploring Ascension Sunday. And in that sermon, you rooted us in spiritual practices as something that keeps us kind of balanced when life is getting unbalanced, when we're going through a season in life where a lot of change is happening.
Right.
So maybe to kick it off, can you tell us about a time when you went through a lot of change and your spiritual practices were huge for you?
Sure. Well, in some ways, I'm going through that season now. When you go through any kind of life stage transition, like becoming an empty nester and having your kids leave the house and start their own blessed young adult lives, for me, it's a time of rediscovery, reinvention, of trying to find a new stable footing that establishes my identity on something different than what it was before. And that framework can be translated into almost every kind of life stage transition any of us go through. Who am I now? Who am I becoming? And so really that kind of transitional moment is what the disciples were experiencing when they watched Jesus ascend into heaven, never to return. Who are we now? And who is God calling us to become?
Yeah, and what do we do without the God with us?
Right.
on Earth?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So just to pull back the curtain a little bit, we are filming this on a Thursday. We always film the sermon and the Beyond the Sermon on Thursdays, which means that today actually is, liturgically speaking, in the observance of the Christian year, today is 10 days before Pentecost Sunday, which means today is Ascension Day. And that means that daily readings, for those who follow particular daily readings, are all about the Ascension story. And if I may, part of my spiritual practices has been reading a Benedictine prayer book, and it alerted me to a wonderful homily written by a guy who lived a long, long time ago. His name happened to be Pope Leo.
Not from Chicago?
He's the OG Pope Leo.
Okay.
Like the original Pope Saint Leo the Great, the first one. And he wrote a homily on Ascension Day, which clarified for me why this was so important for the disciples. Because in the spiritual life, Leo says, your faith becomes stronger the less physical evidence you see. And so for the disciples to watch Jesus ascend, not die, because that would have laden them with grief, but for them to watch Jesus ascend means that now they couldn't rely on the visible. They could only rely on what their faith could show them. So in much more elegant language, this is what Leo said. It takes great strength of mind and a faithful and enlightened heart to believe without hesitation in what escapes the bodily eye, and to desire unswervingly what cannot be seen. Yet how could our hearts be inflamed, and how could one be justified by faith if our salvation arose only from what is visible? It's a beautiful homily, and if you want to ask me where this comes from, I can share it with you. But that's exactly what happened to the disciples. Their faith took a hyperspeed jump forward when they could no longer rely on what their senses could verify. Now, this is not to talk about disproving or dispelling science or empiricism or rationality. That's all very important, and we believe in the power of reason and science. But when it comes to navigating life's transitions, when all you could see before that was reliable is now gone, that's when your moments of growth can be the most profound.
I'm reminded of something we used to say to college students when I worked in a college ministry in Atlanta. It was faith based on personal experiences alone will crumble under the weight of your personal experiences.
Absolutely.
I think there's something in there about how when you can no longer see that thing that was giving you that hope, you still have to hold on to it.
Right.
You still have to find a way to hold on to your faith.
That's right. In fact, this whole notion of hope can be reframed. That hope doesn't have to be a belief that something will get better, because sometimes things don't get better, and sometimes it does get better, but that notion of better is relative and it's temporary. So if that's what you stake your hope on, that things will get better, there's an even stronger way to think about hope, which is hope is that thing that keeps you moving forward. There's no guarantee of how things will turn out, better or not. Hope is the thing that keeps you going and keeps you stable. Hope is the thing that gives you the courage to take one more step and to do the risky thing and the courageous thing, but also anchors you with stability. And it's that paradox, as you know, if you watch the sermon, that is all about what it means to ride a bike.
Right. Correct. Right. So another thing that you lifted up quite heavily in the sermon was the value of spiritual practices.
Yeah.
So I've always been one who struggles with spiritual practices.
Sure.
And here's where I'm going to lay it out here, just pure honesty. And maybe there's someone listening or watching who is new to Christianity and is like, man, how do I fit this in? So I have a very healthy workout routine.
Yeah.
My wife and I have a very healthy, check-in each week routine about setting our family business in order, right?
Yeah,
Budgeting, grocery shopping, meal planning. We have all these routines.
Yeah.
But gosh darn it, I cannot get a routine to read the Bible or to pray or meditate on a daily basis.
Sure.
What would you say to me, oh wise one, about how to do those better?
Yeah. Well, it is trial and error. It's like trying to find your own fashion sense. It's trying on different outfits, trying on different practices until something clicks, where the time of day, the routine itself reveals something to you about who you are and who you can be. It is also not just a spiritual thing. It is a balance. Remember when Jesus gave us the great commandment, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Spiritual practices do need to be intertwined with emotional healthy practices and physical healthy practices. And the intersection of all of those things suddenly makes everything about your personhood click. So if you just rely on finding the right way to pray, or just rely on finding the right way to journal or the right way to read scripture, then it can be a little fumbly. But when you see it holistically, like how, I'll just say for me, my spiritual practices are contingent on my physical practices.
Of running, of having to...
Not just that. I've discovered that if I don't go to bed at a reasonable enough hour, and if I don't get enough sleep, then I wake up and the last thing I want to do is put my mind focused on reading an ancient text.
Yeah.
When I wake up after a full night of sleep, or even a marginally good night of sleep, then I wake up with more alertness and more attentiveness to how my body is doing, how my spiritual sense is doing, and I can enter that scripture time with a sense of how I'm doing. And that will give me a filter and a lens to enter that prayer time. So a lot of it is contingent on how you take care of your body, how you take care of your mental and emotional well-being, how your relationships are with other people, and then also how you maintain your prayer life and your scripture reading life. It's all integrative. It is all integrative. And at the end of the day, here's the liberating thing. At the end of the day, it is what you can control. It's like the only thing you can control most days is how you order your life. And there's something liberating about that. Like I will wake up in the morning and think, I'm thinking about my schedule and all the crazy things that lie ahead of me. But the only thing I can control is what I do for this next hour. And so I will cherish this.
Yeah, and I imagine that ebbed and flowed as your life circumstances changed. As your girls were in the house, when your girls were out of the house.
I have thought about that a lot. Like the routine that I have now, there's no way I could maintain it when I was making breakfast, getting girls up, and getting them off to school. Yeah,
so you want to speak into that for a second for a gentleman sitting next to you who's living that life at the moment?
Yeah, so it's adaptive, it's iterative. Yeah. Part of your spiritual practice is caring for those that you are entrusted to care about. And so there is probably a way to make that a spiritual practice for yourself, to not just make the lunches, but to do so mindfully and prayerfully. Maybe there's a way that you could center your daily routine involving the kids in some kind of spiritual rootedness. I don't have an exact suggestion of that, but there is a way to make the physical spiritual, to make the spiritual physical, and to make it all mental and emotional and integrative together.
I think that's really beautiful. And I think that's undoing some hangups that I've had around spiritual practices in my own life since I've really been a part of this community here, because it did feel like another checklist in some ways. Yeah. And when you're dealing with kids or a blended family or your own stuff that you're working on, to fit that in and feel like not only is it spiritual practices, but in our format, it feels like 7 spiritual
Seven
practices.
spiritual
right?
practices.
It can get to be a lot. And I don't think I'm the only one who feels that way.
Right.
And so sometimes I like to press against that a little bit. And what I really appreciate in what you said, though, is imbue that time with your kids with some sense of presence.
Right.
Marginally spiritual if you can.
Yeah.
Because I do try and be present with Jackson and think about how am I actually talking to him in this moment, not just to deal with this moment, but to make him a better human being for the future.
Right.
For whoever he becomes in this world.
Right.
That he would think more compassionately.
Right.
I try and talk to him that way.
Right.
In a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
So I think in some ways that's a little bit of a spiritual practice in some ways of being aware that my interactions with this child is more than just get breakfast made, get out the door. There's something more going on there.
The formal way to talk about it would be to say, to theologize about that moment. And that doesn't mean doing any kind of high level, cerebral kind of intellectualizing about those interactions with Jackson, but it simply means rooting it in something greater than yourself.
Yeah.
Rooting it in your sense of who God is and who God is calling you to be as a father. That's a way to center the daily rhythms in something that is bigger and deeper than yourself. And to the first thing you said, I try to say this as often as I can without sounding like I'm beating the drum too much. Spiritual practices is a misnomer. It is a misleading label because it suggests exactly what you're saying, that it's just another checklist on top of endless checklists every day. And when we see it as another obligation to fulfill, just another action, then we remove it from what its primary purpose is. It's stabilizing. It is resilience building. It is identity reinforcing. It helps us reminds us of who we are and who God is calling us to become. It's only secondarily about practices. It's mostly about centering ourselves in who God is calling us to be.
All right, as we wrap up, because we've gone a little long today, but I think this is important. You kind of hinted at something that you shared with us in staff meeting about spiritual practices and resiliency.
Yeah.
Can you just flesh out that idea in brief?
Yeah. So the best metaphor I can think of right now is astrophysics. So I know we're over time, and I just introduced astrophysics. But these are simple concepts we learned in high school physics, that for a body to stay in orbit, it needs both centrifugal and centripetal motion, which means it has to be balanced between moving inward by the force of gravity and outward by the force of momentum. And that's the spiritual life, that we are constantly called to move inward and more deeply closer to Jesus. And that's where I think spiritual practices helps us. But also to move outward in acts of compassion and mercy and justice toward others. You can't have one without the other. You can't have action without contemplation. And that is resilience over the long haul. It's what keeps us in orbit. It's what keeps us from crashing to earth or flying out into the universe. It's what orders our lives. And so when there is something chaotic happening in the country, in the world, in our nation, in our lives, what's the balance between centrifugal and centripetal, between action and contemplation? And spiritual practices are that balance.
They help us find that balance. What I hear you saying is they help us find that balance, stay in orbit, quote unquote,
right,
which is that big word resiliency.
Exactly.
To be more resilient because we're doing spiritual practices.
That's exactly right.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, Magrey. Thanks for checking it out. If you want to find out more about our sermons or our church, you can go to the notes section down below where we have next steps, and you can discover more about Hyde Park United Methodist. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.